Dr. Arion, Senior Health Education.
She came in on a Tuesday morning, 71 years old, retired school teacher. She told me she felt fine, genuinely fine, right up until she didn't. Her systolic blood pressure, the top number, was sitting at 178 when the paramedics arrived. Not from stress, not from exertion, from sleeping. She had gone to bed at her usual time, eaten the dinner she always ate, taken the medication she never missed. And still, in the quiet of the night, her blood pressure climbed to a number that put her at serious risk. Here is what nobody told her, what nobody tells most people over 60, that blood pressure doesn't behave the same after dark the way it did when you were 40. That the hours between 10 at night and 2 in the morning are, for many older adults, the most dangerous window of the day. And that one simple drink consumed within 30 minutes of going to bed may help support healthier overnight blood pressure, without a prescription, without a special diet overhaul, without anything complicated at all. Today I am going to walk you through exactly what that drink is, why it works the way it does inside the aging cardiovascular system, what the science actually says, and the single most important thing to understand before you try it. Stay with me for all of it, because the last point is the one most people miss, and it may be the most important one of all. My name is Dr. Arion. I have spent more than 2 decades working in cardiovascular health education, and I have sat across from thousands of patients, in waiting rooms, in recovery rooms, in follow-up appointments, asking them the same questions about sleep, about what they eat after dark, about what their evenings look like. And the answers I hear, again and again, reveal a pattern that deserves far more attention than it gets. So let us begin. Let me ask you something first. What did you drink last night before you went to bed? Water? Herbal tea? Nothing at all? Maybe a small glass of juice? I ask every person who sits across from me this question. Most people have never thought about it seriously. And I understand that, because for most of your life, it probably did not matter very much. But after 60, the landscape changes. Here is what happens inside your body during sleep that most people are never told. For a healthy cardiovascular system, blood pressure naturally dips during the night. Cardiologists call this the nocturnal dip. It is a sign that the body is resting, that the heart is getting a break, that the blood vessels are relaxed. But research supported by the American Heart Association has found that many older adults, particularly those with already elevated blood pressure, lose this nocturnal dip. Their blood pressure stays elevated through the night, or in some cases, it actually rises. This is called non-dipping, and it is associated with a meaningfully higher risk of cardiovascular events compared to those who dip normally. Think of it this way. Imagine a garden hose that runs continuously, full pressure, every hour of every day and every night, never turned down, never allowed to rest. Over time, the walls of that hose wear thin, small cracks form. The fittings begin to stress. That is, in a simplified but useful way, what sustained nighttime blood pressure elevation can do to your arterial walls over months and years. The heart never fully rests. The vessels never fully recover. And here is the quiet tragedy. Most people with elevated nighttime blood pressure feel completely normal during the day. No symptoms, no warning, just the gradual invisible wear that accumulates while they sleep. This is exactly why what you drink before bed deserves more serious attention than it has ever received. The drink I want to tell you about is warm hibiscus tea. And before you move past that, before you think, well, I've heard about tea before, I want you to stay with me, because the mechanism here, what this plant actually does inside your blood vessels, is not what most people imagine. Hibiscus subdurifa, the dried calyxes of the hibiscus flower, deep red, slightly tart, contains a class of compounds called anthocyanins and other polyphenols. These are not vague wellness buzzwords. These are specific plant-based compounds that have been studied for their relationship with blood vessel function. The proposed mechanism involves something called ACE inhibition. ACE stands for angiotensin-converting enzyme, and it plays a significant role in regulating blood vessel constriction. Several pharmaceutical blood pressure medications work by inhibiting this same enzyme. Hibiscus has been studied for its potential to support this pathway naturally, and multiple analyses, including reviews drawing on data compiled by institutions including the American Heart Association, have noted that hibiscus tea consumption is associated with meaningful reductions in systolic and diastolic blood pressure in adults with elevated readings. I want to be precise here, because precision matters. This is not a cure. This is not a replacement for medication. If your doctor has prescribed blood pressure medication, you do not stop it. You do not reduce it. You do not alter your regimen without a conversation with your physician first. What hibiscus tea may offer is a gentle, natural complement, something that works alongside healthy habits to support the cardiovascular system during the vulnerable nighttime hours. Margaret was 67, retired accountant. She had been managing stage 1 hypertension for about 4 years when she first came to me. Her readings during the day were borderline meaning they teetered right at the edge of what her medications were controlling. But her overnight readings, taken with a home monitor her cardiologist had recommended, were consistently higher than her daytime numbers. She was a non-dipper, and she was frustrated. She told me she was doing everything right, the walks, the low-sodium meals, the medication, and still the overnight numbers refused to cooperate. We talked about evening habits, about what she consumed after 6 in the evening, and she mentioned that she usually had a small glass of orange juice before bed because she had read it was heart healthy. Here's what nobody told Margaret, and nobody may have told you either, that fruit juice, even genuinely nutritious fruit juice, contains a significant natural sugar load that can cause a glycemic response, a rise in blood sugar, which may in turn affect vascular tone during the early hours of sleep. She wasn't wrong to think orange juice was healthy. She was underinformed about the timing. We made one change. She replaced the evening juice with a warm cup of hibiscus tea, unsweetened or with a very small amount of raw honey if she needed it sweet. 6 weeks later, her overnight readings had shifted noticeably. Her physician was pleased. She was sleeping better. And she told me she felt calmer in the evenings, which matters more than people realize, because psychological calm before sleep is itself associated with healthier nighttime blood pressure regulation. Now, how do you actually make it and when do you drink it? This is where I want to be specific, because vague advice is useless to you. Dried hibiscus calyxes, not hibiscus-flavored blend, not hibiscus herbal mix with added ingredients, but pure dried hibiscus calyxes, which you can find in most health food stores and many grocery stores. 1 to 2 teaspoons per cup of just boiled water. Not boiling water poured directly over the petals. Let it come just off the boil, around 90 to 95 degrees, before steeping. Steep for 5 to 7 minutes. The tea will turn a deep crimson. If you want it slightly sweet, a small amount of raw honey, no more than a half teaspoon, is acceptable. Do not add sugar. Do not drink it cold. Warm liquids before bed support relaxation of the vascular smooth muscle, the tiny muscular walls of your blood vessels, in a way that cold liquids do not. Drink it 30 to 45 minutes before you go to sleep. Not right at bedtime because you do not want a full cup of liquid causing you to wake in the night. 30 to 45 minutes gives your body time to absorb the compounds and process the fluid. That is it. That is the entire routine. What time do you typically go to bed? I want you to think about that right now, because whatever time you said, subtract 45 minutes. That is your hibiscus window. Now I want to talk about something that quietly undermines all of this for many people, and it is something almost nobody discusses. Evening sodium, not the salt you add at the table. The sodium that is already inside the foods most people eat after 5 in the evening, canned soups, deli slices, certain crackers, cheese, processed sauces, frozen meals. The American Heart Association has long emphasized the role of dietary sodium in blood pressure management, and what many people do not realize is that sodium consumed in the evening hours may have a more pronounced effect on overnight blood pressure than sodium consumed earlier in the day, because the body's ability to process and excrete sodium changes across the circadian cycle, the internal biological clock. Think again of that garden hose. Now imagine that someone turned up the water pressure right before you tried to sleep. That, in simplified terms, is what high evening sodium can do to blood vessels that are already working harder than they should. Thomas was 73, a retired firefighter, big man, proud of his health for most of his life. He came in not because of symptoms, but because his daughter had insisted. His daytime readings were controlled, but he mentioned, almost as an aside, that he liked to have a bowl of soup or crackers with cheese while he watched the news at night. He figured it was a light, safe snack. His evening sodium was, on some nights, exceeding his total recommended daily intake in a single sitting. He had no idea. Here is what nobody told Thomas, and here is the part that quietly frustrates me because it is so fixable. The problem was not the crackers themselves. The problem was that nobody had ever sat down with him and said, read the label in the evening the same way you would read a road sign on a dark highway. You need that information before you proceed. We adjusted his evening snack. Lower sodium options, an unsalted handful of walnuts, roughly 14 halves, about 30 grams, which offer healthy fats associated with cardiovascular support, some sliced cucumber, and his hibiscus tea. Within 2 months, his overnight readings had shifted in the right direction, enough that his cardiologist was cautiously encouraged. What do you typically eat after 7 in the evening? If you can picture it right now, I want you to flip whatever package that comes in and look at the sodium per serving. Not tomorrow, tonight. Let me stop here for a moment. I want to talk about magnesium, because this is the part most doctors simply do not have time to explain in a standard appointment, and it connects directly to why so many older adults struggle with nighttime blood pressure even when they are doing everything else correctly. Magnesium is a mineral involved in hundreds of physiological processes, including the relaxation of blood vessel walls. After 60, the body's ability to absorb and retain magnesium from food becomes less efficient. Simultaneously, certain medications commonly prescribed to older adults, including some diuretics and proton pump inhibitors, may further affect magnesium levels over time. The result is that a significant portion of older adults may be mildly low in magnesium without knowing it and without obvious symptoms. Here is what nobody tells you about that. Mild magnesium insufficiency is associated with increased vascular resistance, meaning the blood vessels stay slightly more constricted than they should be, particularly at night when the nervous system should be shifting into a state of rest. You can support magnesium levels through food: dark leafy greens, spinach, kale, pumpkin seeds, almonds, dark chocolate with high cocoa content, legumes. These are not exotic items. They are foods you can add gradually, consistently, as part of an evening meal or afternoon snack. If you are considering a magnesium supplement, I want you to speak with your doctor before starting one. Magnesium interacts with certain medications and is not appropriate in higher doses for people with kidney disease. This is not a step to take independently, but a conversation with your physician about your magnesium status, possibly a simple blood test, is a completely reasonable thing to request. Eleanor was 64. She came to me after her husband had a cardiac event, not because she herself had symptoms, but because watching what happened to him had awakened something in her. She wanted to be proactive. She wanted to understand her own risk. Her blood pressure was elevated. She was already eating well, she thought, walking regularly, not a smoker, barely a drinker, and yet her nighttime readings were consistently higher than her daytime numbers. We looked at her diet carefully. She was eating almost no magnesium-rich foods, not because she was careless, but because the foods she had grown up with, the foods that felt normal and comfortable to her, simply did not include many of them. She was not wrong. She was not careless. She was underinformed. We added a handful of pumpkin seeds to her afternoon routine. We shifted her evening meal to include more dark leafy greens. We introduced the hibiscus tea before bed, and we had a conversation with her primary care physician about checking her magnesium levels, which came back low normal, something her doctor then addressed appropriately. 3 months later, Eleanor told me she felt quieter inside. That was the phrase she used. Quieter inside. Her readings had improved. Her sleep had deepened. And she felt, for the first time in years, like she was doing something that was actually working. This is why I keep doing this work. Now, let us talk about what you do with your body in the final 90 minutes before sleep, because this matters more than most people realize, and it ties directly back to overnight blood pressure. Screen time. Specifically, the light emitted by phones, tablets, and televisions. The scientific literature, as reviewed by the National Institutes of Health and Sleep researchers, has consistently associated evening blue light exposure with disruption of melatonin production, melatonin being the hormone that signals the body to prepare for sleep. But what is less often discussed is that this same disruption is associated with increased sympathetic nervous system activity, the fight-or-flight branch of your nervous system, precisely during the hours when blood pressure should be dropping. Put simply, too much screen stimulation in the final 90 minutes before bed may be quietly preventing the nocturnal dip your cardiovascular system needs. I am not asking you to give up your television. I am asking you to consider shifting to lower stimulation content in the final hour. Something calm, something quiet, something that does not raise your heart rate or agitate your thoughts. And if you use a phone or tablet, many devices now have night mode settings that reduce blue light emission. It is a small adjustment. But across weeks and months, small adjustments compound. Ask yourself, what was the last thing you watched before you fell asleep last night? Was it calming? Or was it a news program, a crime drama, a debate that raised your blood pressure on its own? Let me tell you about someone I think about often. He was 69 years old, a carpenter his whole life. Hands that had built more things than he could count. Houses, furniture, a life. He came in because his wife had made the appointment. He would not have come on his own. He told me directly, I feel fine. I don't need this. His blood pressure was 162/94. He had been at those numbers more or less for over a year. He had not been told clearly enough what that sustained elevation was doing, quietly, to his arterial walls, his kidneys, his brain. He was not in pain. He had no dramatic symptoms. He just felt like himself. I did not give him a lecture. I sat with him for a moment and I said, I understand you feel fine, and I am not here to frighten you, but I need you to understand something, and I need you to hear it as I mean it. The body does not always warn you before something serious happens. The pressure builds and builds, and sometimes the first symptom is the event itself. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked me what he could do, not what medication could do, what he could do. We built an evening routine together, simple, realistic, built around the life he actually lived, not a theoretical wellness plan that had nothing to do with him. He started with the tea, then he adjusted his evening snacks. Then he turned the television off 20 minutes earlier than usual and sat on his back porch instead. His wife would sit with him sometimes. They would just talk. 6 months later, his systolic was at 144. Not perfect, but meaningfully better. His doctor adjusted his medication accordingly, and he told me, I actually feel quieter when I wake up now, like something settled overnight. That is what we are building toward. Not perfection, settling. Here is your evening routine, drawn from everything we have discussed today. At dinner, ideally no later than 6:30 or 7, be mindful of sodium. Read labels on anything packaged. Aim for a dinner that includes 1 dark leafy green if possible. Spinach in a salad, steamed kale, sautéed chard with olive oil and garlic. It does not need to be elaborate. Between dinner and bed, if you want an evening snack, choose wisely. 14 walnut halves, some raw almonds, sliced cucumber or celery, low sodium options. Skip the crackers, the deli slices, the canned soups in the evening hours if your blood pressure is elevated. 90 minutes before bed, begin reducing screen stimulation. Lower the light in the room. Switch to something calm on television if you watch, or sit with a book, music, or quiet conversation. 45 minutes before sleep, prepare your hibiscus tea. 1 to 2 teaspoons of dried hibiscus calyxes, steeped in just off boiling water for 5 to 7 minutes. Unsweetened or with a small amount of raw honey. Drink it slowly. Sit with it. This is not something to rush. 30 minutes before sleep, dim the lights further. Reduce noise. Let the nervous system begin its transition. When you get into bed, your body has been given every possible signal that it is time to rest, to lower, to settle. Not to fight, not to hold on. That is the routine. That is what we are building. Have you ever tracked your own blood pressure at home? Do you know what your overnight numbers look like? This is a question worth bringing to your doctor. A simple home blood pressure monitor, used consistently, gives you and your physician information that a single office reading cannot. Ask about it at your next appointment. Now, before I close, I want you to share this with someone you love. Not because I am asking for the sake of asking, but because blood pressure is one of the most underestimated, under-discussed risks in people over 60, and most of the people sitting quietly in their homes right now, feeling fine, have no idea what their overnight readings look like. If there is someone in your family, a spouse, a sibling, a parent, an old friend, who is managing hypertension or who has never had a real conversation about nighttime blood pressure, send this to them. You might be doing something more important than you realize. Leave me a comment below, I read them, and tell me, what time do you typically go to bed and what is your current evening routine? I am genuinely curious what patterns emerge, and if you have already tried hibiscus tea and noticed a difference, I would love to hear about that too. Subscribe to Senior Health Education for weekly guidance built specifically around the health questions that matter most after 60. We do not do generic wellness content here. We do specific, careful, evidence-informed information for people who deserve to understand what is happening inside their own bodies. One final thing. Everything I share here is for educational purposes only. It is not a substitute for personal medical advice from your own physician. If your blood pressure is elevated, please work with your doctor. If you experience sudden severe headache, chest pain, shortness of breath, vision changes, weakness on one side of the body, or any symptom that feels new, alarming, or unlike anything you have felt before, do not wait. Call emergency services immediately. These can be signs of a serious event, and time matters enormously in those moments. And if you are on blood pressure medication, please do not stop it, reduce it, or adjust it without speaking directly with your prescribing physician. What I have shared today is meant to complement your care, not to replace it. Take good care of yourself tonight. You deserve to sleep soundly, and your heart deserves the rest.